All right, I'm joined by journalist and boxing pundit Peter Badel. Pete, you've been at your absolute journalistic best this weekend, mate. There's some big news coming out of Tim Tszyu's camp with a sort of legal dispute with his former manager Glenn Jennings, mate. What can you tell us?
Yeah, it's look, it's been boiling for a while, Macca, I believe, but I broke the story this morning that there's been a legal dispute between Tim Tszyu and Glenn Jennings. Now, it hasn't progressed to the courts as yet, although it looks like that's the way it's headed. So I made calls to both camps in the last few days to piece this story together, and basically, in layman's terms, Glenn Jennings is pursuing Tim for a breach of contract. Now, according to Glenn Jennings, he believes that he has a contract with Tim that was binding. And of course, as we know, Tim separated from Glenn Jennings and Team Zoo, the rest of the camp, about in September. And he's now got a new team. He's got Pedro Diaz as his trainer. He's got Darcy Ellis as his manager. So Glenn Jennings is saying that I still have a formal contract and we need a formal separation where we've got two companies involved. There's Tim Zoo's personal company and there's Glenn Jennings's management company, Fight Life Management. So Glenn is saying that at the moment he has a contract with Tim. They need to be formally dissolved. And so he's trying to sort that out. Now, I spoke to Glenn Jennings's lawyer, Chris White, who says that at the moment, he's tried to get the zoo camp to the table. It hasn't been forthcoming. They've ignored emails. They've ignored phone calls. So the way it looks, according to the Jennings camp, is that I'm told that they had until January the 31st to come to some sort of resolution privately without the courts. That obviously has now passed that date, and there's been no resolution. So, according to Glenn and his lawyer, they now have the power to, I guess, go to the Supreme Court of New South Wales to get a formal hearing and get a verdict. So, look, the sad thing in this, Smacker, is this is so boxing, isn't it? I mean, there always seems to be some dispute in the end between a trainer, a promoter, a boxer. It always seems to happen. It's a shame this has happened because it was a wonderful 8.5 year partnership. I mean, Glenn took Tim from rookie greenhorn to world champion. Not only Glenn, but obviously the rest of Team Zoo with Igor, his trainer and uncle. So look, it's sad, but ultimately Glenn Jennings feels that he has a contract with Tim and it now has to be resolved, and it looks like it's headed to the New South Wales Supreme Court to make a final determination.
What response has there been from Team Zoo? Have you spoken to that side? We saw Jeff Fennick come out in defence of Tim.
Yeah, look, it's been hard to get hold of Tim, obviously, because he's in camp in Miami. So, I mean, he's got better things to do at the moment. He's preparing for his fight next month. So, I didn't try and bother Tim, but I reached out to Darcy Ellis, his manager, and he didn't really have a comment. Nor did his legal team. I reached out to them. I didn't hear from them, but I did have some dialogue with Jeff Fennick, who's I guess an advisor or mentor to Tim, and he has said that he'll back Tim to the hill. He believes that Tim's been dudded in some way. I don't know what that is. I mean, that might come out in the fullness of time if there's a court hearing. So at the moment, as it stands, they're at, I guess, 50 paces, and it's going to have to be determined by the looks of it in a court of law. It doesn't seem to appear that they're able to sort things out amicably in a private settlement. And ultimately, Matt, look, I'm not an expert on law. I'm not a contract law aficionado, but it's as simple as, I guess, if it goes to court, Glenn will allege a breach of contract. The court will either determine one of two things, I guess. It's either a case where Glenn, yes, he's got a watertight contract that must be, if it's not honoured, then there will have to be a payout. So Tim would face some sort of damages to Glenn. Now, I put to Glenn that I heard it was about $1 million that he was seeking from Tim. Glenn disputed that figure, denied that figure. So it could be less, it could be more, I don't know. But that's the figure I'd heard. And so either the courts say Tim has to pay Glenn Jennings and then there'll be a separation, or I guess they rule in favour of Tim, and Glenn walks away having to, accept the fact that he's no longer the manager of Tim, and there's been a dissolution there. So look, I don't know what the verdict will be if it does go to court, but it was always going to get messy. I felt because there was always an undercurrent, Macca, as you probably know, between the camps. And look, it was a sudden separation, a sudden divorce, and in those cases, there's always going to be some disappointment and pain. So it's sad because they had a lot of success together. But look, I just hope there can be a resolution and everyone can move forward.
Mm. Were you surprised when you first heard of this? Because Glenn obviously still manages Nikita, and there's that crossover there. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, it's a tricky dynamic, isn't it, Macca? Because Nikita now has the very team that took Tim Tszyu to world title dominance. So what that presents for the brothers, I don't know. I mean, there's always been talk that Tim and Nikita aren't super close. They're just different personalities, but they'll always be brothers, of course. So I don't know what it means for them as in a family sense, but it must be hard for Tim in a sense to see Nikita now working with the very people that took him all the way. So look, I know that. I know Glenn Jennings is disappointed that he feels that there's been some sort of inference that he may have ripped off Tim, that he's dudded Tim financially, and Glenn says, in the early stages of his career, he was giving Tim an allowance because he was trying to look after his money for Tim's betterment down the track, because we all know with some boxers, Macca, when you get your payday and you've got taxes to pay, you want to enjoy the spoils of victory. It's not always boxers and many people in general don't always look after their money in the best way possible. So look, Glenn Jennings is a successful businessman. He ran a successful security company. So he's always said that he's got Tim's best interest at heart, and he was always setting Tim up for success. And you could argue, Macca, when you look at Tim, not only in the ring, but out of the ring, he's now got properties. He's bought his own home. So he's now very wealthy, and Glenn Jennings deserves some credit for that. No doubt Tim, of course, because he had to get in the ring and fight, but no limit. His promoters and Glenn Jennings, his manager, have done a wonderful job taking him along the journey, not only as a boxer, but as a person, and a person that has to manage money and sometimes amounts of money that you would never have foreseen as a young person. So I think overall Glenn Jennings has done a wonderful job, but I guess in terms of a court sense, there's a difference between what you think's morally right and what's contractually right. So that's what may have to be determined in the coming weeks.
You mentioned Tim is currently in camp over there in Miami. I guess, is this a distraction of any sorts? And what are you hearing about the return of Tim Tszyu?
No, look, I don't think it'd be a big distraction, Mac. Tim's got a job to do. I mean, he'd be leaving the legal stuff to his lawyers. I'm hearing in regards to his next fight. I had heard March 25 as a date. I think there may be a slight change. I was hearing yet just yesterday, March 22 or March 29. 29 would surprise me because obviously there's the Fedora Thurman fight, so there could be a bit of a clash there globally. I had heard that Tim may fight in Melbourne, but they're also looking at the Gold Coast as a possible venue now that Liam Paro has secured that world title shot against Lewis Crocker. So there may be a double header where we see Paro and Tszyu on the Gold Coast, perhaps either March 25, March 22, or maybe even early April. But I think March is the late March is the landing zone. And I'm told that they're looking at an American opponent again for Tim Tszyu. So, of course, we had Anthony Velasquez in his last fight. That was a solid win there over 10 rounds. And they're now looking at another American, is what I'm told. Nothing's locked in, but that's the direction they're heading. So, Tim Tszyu likely in late March, Gold Coast or Melbourne against an American.
What have you made of, I guess, the new team of Tim Tszyu? Obviously, we've only seen him once in the ring. There's been some changes there with the the new manager and Pedro Diaz come in. First impressions on that, and what are you expecting from Tim Tszyu this year? Obviously, number two with the WBO as well. What do you expect?
Yeah, look, it's an amazing rise in the rankings, isn't it? It really goes to show the nous and strategic power of No Limit in the way they're able to position their fighters, and they manage to get world title shots for them, or they get them elevated in the rankings pretty quickly. Look, how's his new team going? It's probably early to say, Macca. I mean, it's only one fight in. It wasn't his best performance, Tim, but that's understandable given that he was coming off a really brutal loss and had to rebuild some confidence. Look, there's been some criticism, Macca, about Pedro Diaz and whether he's the right fit and what does he know about training in Australia. And look at his record. I mean, I think he's got 21 or 22 world champions now. McAllister, of course. So look, I think Tim seems to be happy with Pedro, and really that's all you can ask for. I mean, if I felt that Tim has said previously, he felt that he needed a change. And if a fighter feels that he needs that change and it has to happen, well, he's enacted it. He's acted upon it, and now he's got to make it work with his new team. And look, so far, I think Mike Altamura is a world class matchmaker, and he'll position Tim carefully and delicately. And also, there's that balance where you also want sexy fights, right? You want to be attractive to the public. You want to have good sales for the promoter. So there's a balancing act there for Altamura and No Limit. But I think Pedro Diaz at the moment seems to be a good fit for Tim. And as they say, I mean, sometimes there's 2 or 3 camps in training before you probably realise your chemistry and your dynamics. So I still think Tim's got upside with Pedro Diaz, and we'll probably find out in his next fight whether he's then ready for a real blockbuster fight like Spence, or whether he just keeps going along with some lower ranked international opponents.
Hmm. Liam Paro, some massive positive news for him. You mentioned there could be on a card with Tim Tszyu, but just on that purse bid, a big amount of money spent by No Limit on Liam Paro.
Yeah. I mean, amazing, Macca. I mean, the richest purse bid ever for an Australian boxing promotion. Just amazing stuff. Look, there's a little bit of there's a conspiracy here, theory here, Macca, that this was deliberate by Eddie Hearn, that he was happy to let No Limit ultimately win the purse bid and trying to force them to pay more and ultimately get a good payday for Crocker. But look, I don't know about that. To me, I mean, if you No Limit, you probably think you've outsmarted Eddie again, as they did with Mikhailovich a couple of years ago when he fought Janibek here in Australia. So, look, I think this is wonderful for Liam Paro. And again, it's testament to No Limit and their ability to secure world title fights for their fighters. Now, they get a lot of criticism, but I'll tell you what, you look at some of the fights they've got for their fighters in pretty exceptional and immediate circumstances. I mean, Liam Wilson had a world title fight after 13 fights. This is only Paro's second fight in the No Limit stable, and he was waiting for years for a world title shot. And then it finally came against Prograis, if you remember, and then it fell over. And then he had to go to Puerto Rico to fight Matias, and then he had to defend in Puerto Rico, which was a disgrace. So credit to No Limit for having the balls to put up some big bucks to get their fighters defences or world title shots in Australia. And this is the moment that Liam Paro deserves. I think he can be a 2 division world champion. We haven't had many of them, Mako. Obviously Jeff Fennick and then Danny Green, I think, won an IBO world title. So this is massive for Liam Paro, and I think this is almost a better fight for him than Donovan. Like, I think Donovan potentially was more dangerous than Crocker. I really think he, on home soil, he's got the toolkit to beat Crocker.
First time we spoke since Nikita Tszyu, Michael Zerafa up there in Brisbane. A few weeks on now, 3 or so weeks on. How do you reflect on that night and I guess all that's happened since?
Yeah, well, the dust has settled pretty quickly, hasn't it, Mako? The world's moved on from Michael Zerafa. Who would have thought? Oh, look, it was a wild night. I mean, there was a lot of emotion flowing through everybody that night, myself included. I said on the night it was a disgrace, and I still stand by that. But when you hear the post fight rhetoric and analysis, maybe Michael Zerafa had a point. I mean, there was an argument that he shouldn't have even been consulted. Apparently, there was some suggestion under the rules that with an eyelid cut, it's an immediate doctor stoppage, that they don't even consult the fighter. So, look, obviously, Chris Condon, the referee, who's magnificent, he's a real veteran. He wanted the fight to continue for the whole theatre, for the fans. And look, I don't know if Mick Zerafa had his time again, maybe he fights on, but right now, I mean, I spoke to Glenn Jennings just yesterday, and he's adamant there'll be no rematch. I mean, there's been some speculation that it might eventually happen, and then with the passing of all the drama, that eventually people would be up for it again. But I heard the pay-per-view sales were exceptional, so there's clearly an appetite for a Zerafa Zoo rematch. But I just think there's been too much water under the bridge. I mean, Glenn said to me yesterday, "There's no way we're going back there." Nikita's said, "I'm not doing it. Nick should retire." Mick Zerafa's laying low at the moment. I've tried to reach out to his manager to organise an interview. That hasn't been forthcoming as yet. So look, I don't know what it means for Mick. Whether he fights again, I don't know. But I think he'll find it hard to find a platform, at least a pay-per-view platform. He may fight on smaller shows, but I don't think No Limit have any inclination to touch him either. So that's problematic for Michael.
Hmm. Yeah, I think the thing for me is the fact that he lied. I think if he just went along with the story that he couldn't see, no one can disprove it. But the fact that he said he didn't say it, the cover up is almost worse than the crime, Pete.
Oh, and that's a perfect summation, Macca. And look, to be honest, he then said He then said that he had a fractured eye socket and had, but we still haven't seen the scans of that. We don't know if that really happened. So, look, it was a shit fight overall. It was a disgraceful end to what was shaping up as a real blockbuster fight. What disappoints me, Macca, is Michael Zerafa was right in that fight. He won the first round. Nikita had the second, and there's some feeling that Nikita was starting to physically exert himself and starting to dominate Michael, but we still don't know what would have happened. I mean, I thought Michael was catching him with his hand speed. Now, whether he had the power to stop Nikita, I don't know. But I still think if the rounds wore on, one thing is certain, he wouldn't have been fitter than Michael Zerafa because Michael Zerafa's a fit guy. And I think if it went the distance, then Mick would have stayed with him in terms of aerobic capacity. Whether he would have had the punching power is a different matter. But I'm not totally convinced he would have stopped Mick Zerafa. It was looking that way, but I still think Mick he started as well as he could have, and that was the start that he needed to get a bit of confidence. So it's a shame we didn't see the real finality to that fight because I think we were going to see a real barn burner.
Hmm. No limit. I guess what's the reputational damage on those guys, and what's this next? I guess 12 months look like for them. You got Matchroom Boxing, a rumored deal with Fox Sports. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, the landscape's changing now, Macca, in Australia here with pay television. Look, reputational damage zero in my eyes. I think if they did a rematch and if this was to happen again, if Mick was to pull some sort of stunt in fight week and pull out sick or have another drama in the ring and pull out early, I think it'd be massive reputational damage. But right now, I don't think you can blame the promoter for what happened for any promoter if that was that circumstance. Moving forward, though, it's a fascinating landscape this year for No Limit. Look, they'll have some big shows. I mean, I know they're potentially looking at repositioning Tim eventually back in America for a big fight, whether that's Spence or another fight with the PBC platform. And they'll have some big shows. Nikita's on the rise. I mean, from some of the figures I'm hearing, he's a real pay-per-view star now. I mean, the Zerafa fight did serious buys for Nikita Tszyu. So that shows me that he's genuine pay-per-view quality and credibility. And so the interesting thing will be, are Matchroom a threat now that Eddie Hearn is coming into Australia formally? They've done this 8-fight deal with Fox Sports, of whom I work for, obviously, on the main event coverage. Look, I don't think they're a huge, I don't believe they're a massive threat to No Limit. I really don't. I mean, to me, Macca, if you look at sport generally, and even in business, I mean, there's the power of duopolies. I think duopolies can elevate both brands. And we've seen it even here in rugby league in Queensland. I mean, everyone thought the Dolphins coming in would be a threat to the Broncos, but Brisbane's crowds have gone up since the Dolphins have come in, and both their sponsorships, they're number 1 and 2 in the league for corporate dollars. So it goes to show the power of duopoly. It creates competitive tension. And when you have competitive tension, you lift your game. And I think No Limit are already world class as a promoter and a promotion. And they understand the theatre of boxing. They understand the quality of boxing. And I think Matchroom will take them to another level. But I still say, Macca, what I've seen from Matchroom shows so far in Australia, for me at least, have been underwhelming. Now, for me, Eddie Hearn is the greatest orator. He's the greatest promoter or seller of boxing in the world. I love listening to him. I love watching him. I love what he says about his fighters. I love the shows that he puts on in the Northern Hemisphere. I mean, he's had 90,000 to his fights. But I think he's going to face potentially some tyranny of distance issues because we're a small economy here in Australia. We're only got 25 million people. We're a long way away. We're not a major fiscal player in the boxing market. So I think some of the shows I've seen so far from Matchroom here have been less than A plus, haven't they? You know, like Paro Jarvis a couple of years ago. That was their debut. That was at in the Piazza here in Brisbane, pretty underwhelming. And then we've seen, of course, Cambosis card against Wiley Dibb. So, and now we're talking about a headliner with Sky Nicholson. I mean, to be honest, yeah, Sky's a good boxer, but is she pay-per-view quality? Oh, I don't think so, not in my opinion. So, look, Matchroom, they're going to have to increase their stable here locally. They've got Tera Moana, of course, they've got Justice Hooney. They've lost Opetaia. That's a massive blow. I mean, he could have been a star on Fox, and it really disappoints me that he has not been a star. I wish he had signed with No Limit. I wish he'd stayed with Matchroom, but it doesn't seem like Tasman Fighters and Matchroom are having probably the dynamics that they once did. So in terms of synergies, for Matchroom probably needs some localized fighters to bolster their cards. Where Eddie Hearn gets that and how he sustains that is going to be the challenge for him here in Australia.
You mentioned Jai Opetaia. What have you made of his signing to Zuffa Boxing? And what are you expecting to see from him this year?
Oh, look, he's. I find it mystifying, Mako. Really, the Jai Opetaia story. I mean, I think it's almost shameful what's happened to him. You know, like he's our greatest world champion at the moment, and I just have so much regard for him as a boxer. I think he's unbelievable. And I said to Mick Francis when he left, when they severed ties with Dean Lonigan and Dean Events after that world title win in 2022, I said to Mick at the time, I said, mate, sign with No Limit. Like if because he was saying that he wanted Jai what really mattered to Jai was making an impression, making a statement in Australia and having some presence here and being adored by the public. And I think and I said to Mick, I said, mate, the way to do it is to sign with the best promoter locally that can elevate him on a pay-per-view platform in Fox Sports and Main Event. And he chose to go with Matchroom at the time. Understandable because they're a big brand overseas, of course, too. So, but I just think the Zuffa one's stunned me. I really did, Macca. And look, I guess in the fullness of time, it'll be vindicated if Jai gets a massive unification fight and gets the paydays he deserves. But if he's to fight, like March 8 against another guy that's just another plotter, like some of the other plotters he's fought recently, it's just he deserves better. And it's a disgrace, really. He deserves better. And it's time for him to get the real big money fights. And that's where the pressure falls to his promoter too. And it's not always Mick Francis' fault. There's other parts in the machine that sometimes preclude these fights taking place. But I really think Mick Francis and his promotion need to find a way to get a unification fight and big money fights done. Because to sit there and whinge and say, oh, like Ramirez is dodging me. I mean, Ramirez has taken Benavidez, so he's hardly scared of Jai Opetaia. So clearly there's a cachet issue or some sort of issue that's preventing Jai getting these fights. And I just hope time doesn't run out for him because he's getting a bit older and he's getting some miles on the belt with some of the wars he's had. You know, Sin Cara was a tough fight too. And so, look, I really hope Jai can explode as a talent and a promotional talent as well, not only in the ring but outside the ring because it's what he deserves.
Righto, mate. When can we next expect to see you grace our boxing screens, mate? When are we back on the when are we back on the circuit? What's coming up?
Well, it looks like Timmy Zoo Paro could be the double header. So we'll be back on for that, Macca, and we can't wait, mate. It's all been happening, and even I was fascinated, Macca, too. I don't know what you thought, but the Murders Alive fight. I think for us Australian boxing fans, we let's just touch on that quickly. I was stunned by Josh Kelly's win, and it really made me. It almost pissed me off because I thought I just wish Tim Zoo. I have no doubt if Tim was watching that fight, he would have thought, if I just fought smarter, I could have beaten this bloke. Because I watched Murtazalayev, I did some intel on him and I watched him in his fight against Kolkay and I thought, geez, he looks quite slow. He looks a bit sluggish. He's a bit one-paced, a bit one-dimensional. I think Tim can beat this bloke. And then he tried to trade, which is probably the very avenue that was what he wanted back from. He wanted to bang, and Tim took the wrong tactics. And I look at that Josh Kelly fight, and it was a real opportunity missed because I think Tim could have beaten Backram, and I think I'd back Tim to give Josh Kelly a run too. So let's hope when back Macca for Tim next month that he gets the job done and the machine keeps rolling.
Just last one before we go. People out there will be, I guess, questioning or wondering why a world title fight would be perhaps, the co-main or on the undercard of someone like Tim Tszyu. Can you sort of explain the thinking or your interpretations of that?
Yeah, well, look, it's pretty simple, Mac. I mean, the pragmatic view is that Liam Paro is just not a big enough star yet. Basically, I mean, he just hasn't got the traction, and he would know it himself. Liam, I mean, he's a champion bloke, lovely guy, great fighter, deserves to be a pay per view star. But it's only early in his career, in terms not in terms of fights, but in terms of promotional infancy, in terms of pay per view quality. It's only an early journey for him at the moment. So, no limit sentiment would be that Paro's not a big enough name yet to carry a pay per view on his own if they're looking for major pay per view sales. And so, if you have Tim there, obviously Tim's probably the most recognised name in Australian boxing with the public. So, if you can parlay a Paro world title fight into a Tim Tszyu fight on the Gold Coast, potentially on a Sunday, because I'm hearing the dates, it could be a Wednesday night or a Sunday. A Sunday show would be magnificent. I mean, we've seen it before with Mendoza on the Gold Coast, Campo on the Gold Coast. Sunday boxing is magnificent. So I really hope it happens. But that's the thinking, Macca. I just don't feel that it would be nice for Paro to have his own show because I think he deserves it, given it's a world title fight. But to really bolster and beef up the card, having Tim and Paro, it's not a bad double header.
Beauty. All right, Pete. Always appreciate your time, mate. Nice one.
Anytime, Macca. Love your work, mate.